It didn't go live. No worries. Here, I could wait a moment and then try again. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Representing the Resin. My name is Jameson Wellborn, and today we're joined by Brennan and Wayne of Brindle Farms. Brennan and Wayne, thank you so much for taking the time.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. It's great to be here.
So where are you joining us from today?
We're in Souk, BC, which is on Vancouver Island.
Right on. So you guys are a true legacy to legal transition story. You just reached the market with your products through Old Growth Collective, who's a connection that you've had from, back in legacy days. And there's a ton of stuff that I want to unpack there as people who, aren't just talking about it, but have actually done it and ran the gauntlet and gotten through. But before we start there, I want to learn a little bit more about you guys. So Brennan, I want to start with you. Can you tell me a little bit more about yourself, where you're from, where you grew up?
I grew up in Toronto, central Toronto, Yonge and Eglinton area. And I was out there until I graduated high school. I did 1 year at Dalhousie in Halifax, and then I moved out to here and did my undergrad at UVic.
So what was life like, central Toronto growing up in those early days? Like, was cannabis a part of your life at that point?
Yeah, I started smoking cannabis in grade 7, so pretty early, I would say. First time I tried it, I was definitely about it. I definitely, every few days, every other day, on the weekend, pretty quickly turned into every day.
Was it were you aware of the plant for a long time before you tried it, or did those two things happen very close to each other?
I think I had an awareness for a while before trying it, and wasn't until an opportunity presented itself that I kind of just figured, now's the time.
Mm-hmm. And was it a memorable experience? Like, did you get high your first time?
Oh yeah, I got baked my first time. It was great.
That's awesome. So as you're finishing high school, you head out to Dalhousie. I actually went to Dalhousie as well. What was your mindset at that time? Like, were you chasing an occupation? Were you just kind of moving through life and enjoying your time? Where was your headspace?
I had my mind in the commerce program at that point in time. And so, I was trying to, just get educated on running a business, entrepreneurship, that side of things. I really didn't like the huge school system at Dalhousie. And, I had some friends that had come out to UVic, and just hearing about how the school system worked kind of on a much smaller basis, much more personal level. And that seemed a lot more appealing to me.
Did you take commerce with like a chosen business path in mind, or were you always entrepreneurial growing up?
Yeah, my dad's ran businesses and, had a pretty successful business with many employees under him. So that was a really big inspiration for me growing up.
And so did you have was it business in general, or was there a vocation or
I didn't have a vocation. It was always like, I just want to learn this skill set and kind of figure out my place and my lane when the time comes. And, at that time, cannabis was definitely not on my radar as the entrepreneurial play. It was definitely a passion at that point, and just a pastime. And I had always been rooted in a slightly medical use for insomnia. So I always kind of had my finger on the pulse of, how certain strains work well and certain strains don't work well.
Well, I mean, let's talk about that a little bit. You say that you've got a medical use for insomnia. When did you realize that cannabis helped treat that issue for you?
Really, from the beginning of my cannabis use, I noticed that, and it was a fun thing to do on the weekends, but my daily use was more so before bed.
So did you found yourself at like a young age medically treating yourself almost without knowing it, kind of sneaking out late at night by yourself, just ultimately in order to go to sleep and get a better night's rest?
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool. So after after high school, what was your cannabis use like in your first year of university out in Halifax?
The local Halifax scene is definitely very, very not great. So had to really take advantage of my relationships that I had elsewhere. And yeah, I mean, that was a big factor of me leaving as well. Just, not feeling at home on that whole side of things.
Absolutely. So were you a flower smoker at that point heading out to school?
I think I had just taken the BHO plunge at that point. I just probably got my first hash master cut swing arm, and we were just starting to figure out the whole, blasting for yourself and finding things that yielded well enough to be worth the process. And
So you actually were like already blasting and into that by your first year of university?
yeah.
So who like were you so then taking it back, like in high school, were you growing up in a scene where there was that culture where the older generation was teaching you these things like blasting and things like that, or were you seeking your information out more online and in forums?
Yeah, it was all forums back then. It's like we were really kind of that BHO phase was just kicking off then, and the information was on the forums, and we kind of all found each other there and really kind of worked together to figure out what needed to be done.
So when did you first open blast?
Probably that same year,
That same year, that
if
first year?
not, yeah, it would have been around then.
Yeah. And so after you had made the decision to move from Halifax out to Victoria, what was the first move? Like what was your first action when you got out to Vic? Like you got situated, did you start moving cannabis? What did that look like?
We had just kind of gotten involved into the medical program. I was one of the first, under 18 patients admitted into the Toronto Compassion Center. And so that opened my eyes to the kind of patient side. And as I began getting involved in cultivation and brokering and those types of things, just seeing the, opportunistic side of this industry as well.
Yeah. That's so before you were 18, you were part of the Compassion Project. Does that mean you were involved with that in Ontario?
Yeah.
Wow. That's really cool. And so like how did you reach out and go find that group through the forums and through your online exploration, or how did you come into contact with that group?
Yeah, it was really just individuals on the forums who lived in Toronto who could kind of show us the pathway of at that point one could take advantage of dispensaries that had less strict membership policies and climb a ladder based on transferring memberships and trust you've built with the dispensary you're making the transfer from.
Mm-hmm.
And so in doing so, we got into the Toronto dispensary and as well into the Vancouver Island Compassion Center and
Montreal as well.
yeah, Montreal was the least strict, so that's kind of where we started with our memberships.
Very cool. So I want to switch it over to Wayne right now, and because I know you guys connected in university in Victoria, so I want to take it back and learn a little bit about Wayne. So Wayne, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and where you grew up?
I was also born in Ontario, just north of Toronto in Thornhill. Yeah, Brennan and I knew each other since we lived back then. We both went to a summer camp called Camp Walden, which is just like a sleepover camp focused on outdoor camping and that kind of thing. And we were in different age groups, but we have common friends and we were often associated with the same people. And so we maintained a friendship until we both came out here. I came to UBC also to study business and quickly switched to the arts and to history after realizing what was involved in a business degree, not really feeling up to it. But yeah, we both graduated. I graduated from UBC. And by the time I graduated, he was already living in Victoria and already having created the brand Brindle Farms, which was strictly a medical direct to patient style brand in its beginning. Not exactly a brand, but these guys were supporting a couple patients who really needed the product and gained a lot from it. There was one patient, not to name names, but he was experiencing seizures, and I experienced firsthand like the benefit of the BHO and oils that these guys were making for them. And I began to learn the processes. I had a definite passion for the plants from a young age as well. And these guys were growing pretty special genetics. They were associated with some of the old hats out here in BC, and like when you know the right people, there's a true heritage here of connoisseur level passion for the plants. There's the whole outdoor scene, there's the whole commercial scene that's focused on export, but there really is a passion here, and there's a group of people who are super focused on finding the best genetics. The Heavenly Days group is one of the biggest inspirations, and linked us to a lot of the genetics that really invigorated our passion to try find new things and to try find special genetics. So yeah, when we got together in those early days, we kind of noted the importance of incorporating and building a brand. So we incorporated Brindle Farms back then. That was 11 years ago now. So over a decade, the brand has existed, and we've copyrighted the brand since then. Because we kind of knew we could, legalization wasn't really in the discussion right then, but we could foresee the future of building recognition, building customer support, and actually having a brand that people recognize moving forward. So yeah, given the timing, was the biggest player. We were involved in the medical scene, dealing with direct to dispensary style cultivation, and as soon as we heard word that legalization was coming, we knew that it was going to be something that was going to be for us for sure.
Absolutely. So before Brindle and before you moved out and sort of connected with Brennan, what was your relationship with cannabis like? When did you first become aware of the plant?
Well, becoming aware that it was actually a plant definitely came a lot later than my actual consumption. I started mostly during high school as well. I was also more so a social outcast. I wasn't really involved in like the drinking, partying scene that was occurring in high school. And, consuming cannabis was hands in hand with, being kind of a pariah and just being on the social outskirts, which I was perfectly comfortable with. And it did slightly reinforce that lifestyle, but it also invigorated a passion for this plant. I also have medical conditions. I suffer from ulcerative colitis and have found a massive benefit in consuming cannabis and controlling my pain and being able to tolerate it on a daily basis and creating an appetite for myself. So daily consumption has been a part of my life for many years now, for sure.
At what point were you able to identify the relief that cannabis gave you with your medical conditions?
Instantaneously, most definitely.
So, as a, first time in high school, you realize that you're getting massive relief from.
Well, I should mention, I was consuming cannabis prior to my diagnosis. My diagnosis was only a few years ago, and I was already consuming cannabis on a daily basis. So it really helped me to tolerate it, and it really hasn't had much of an impact on my life, largely because of the cannabis intake that I have, for sure.
Understood. That's, I think there's a lot of people like that have undiagnosed issues that they're keeping at bay with habitual use of cannabis that they don't even realize. So I think that's really cool. So, you say that you originally went to UBC to study business and then quickly realized that you wanted to, that wasn't for you. What about that business degree wasn't appealing to you?
Specifically math, in all honesty, and the degree to which they break down micro and macroeconomics, like understandably is useful in the application of business, but I just felt that I wasn't able to apply it in my life the way I foresaw my future going. And I really just enjoyed the interactions that took place in arts classes and history. So I lent my focus to that and definitely wanted to finish the degree. I saw value in that for sure.
And so at what point did you connect with Brennan? Like, was it first year, second year, third year? What year of university was that connection?
Yeah, so we were connecting with each other all throughout our time in BC. I was coming to visit him while he was still at UVic, and we would hang out. He was growing in a tent in his university apartment, so we would sneak in there and check out the plants and just oodle over them and just anything to do with the industry. We were in like the Vicks and some of the really early dispensaries on Vancouver Island, so we would often like to go through them and see what they had and try and make hash from their flowers and that kind of thing. We were open blasting back then. That was kind of the only way to create oils for yourself. And we were refining that process as best we can. We bought a closed loop not that long after and evolved those processes. But yeah, we were definitely connected quite a lot through all of university. When it was mostly in my last year when these guys were already starting up the brands and actually creating large scale cultivation that I was coming out to apprentice. And then as soon as I graduated, I just rented a spot right here, got my own medical license, set up a cultivation space for myself, and worked with these guys to help forward the business.
Awesome. Brendan, where's the name Brindle Farms come from?
I mean, we were sitting around one day trying to figure out what unified us as individuals, and all of our dogs were in the room, and we all had Brindle dogs, and really just said Brindle Farms, and it stuck.
That's a pretty cool story. So when you start, at what point was Brindle started? Were you still in university, or had you just left, or?
I didn't dive into cultivation until I graduated. I had a designated grower through my probably last 2 years of university, and became very frustrated with, not getting what I was promised and not getting sativa genetics given to me for my insomnia. And so, it was really a friend of mine from Chicago who was cultivating there, and he knew how it worked out here, and he really just pushed me and said, like, you get the right conversation with a doctor, they sign the form, and you're federally protected to just do this yourself, and then you only have yourself to blame, right? And like, I always loved cannabis, but growing cannabis was like a whole new Pandora's box. Like, I loved growing.
So talk to me a little bit about that. Like, what did the scale up look like? Like, was it a fairly exponential scale up in your growing, in the size of growing that you were doing, or how did that work?
I started with 2,000-watt air-cooled lights in a 4x8 tent, and then mirrored that to two tents, and rocked that out as long as I really could, and then made my first move to a real spot with a real full basement to play with, and we had 16 lights in that basement. And I put in a few years there, and Wayne ended up taking over that place once I'd kind of ran my paces there. And after that, I kind of had, a little operation going in a whole bunch of places, and, had to kind of consolidate back to putting my efforts into a few bigger operations. And then, like Wayne said, we knew we wanted to make some type of play in this legal atmosphere, and it was more just a matter of waiting for the right partnerships and the right real estate opportunities to present themselves. And as soon as the business park here in Souk kind of started materializing and giving permissive zoning to cultivating medicinal cannabis, there wasn't necessarily a guarantee that zoning would be given once recreational came, but they were giving commercial zoning for medical. So we just took the leap of faith that this is where they would want us to be. And so in doing so, we kind of got a good head start as far as building the Brindle Farms brand in a space with our ACMPR license that we transitioned into our micro.
That's really cool that you had the foresight to look at it like that. And I think you did a really good job building your brand in the traditional market when it was thriving for those number of years prior to legalization. I wanted to ask, Wayne talked a little bit about the genetics and the crews that you were tied into. Can you talk a little bit about those genetics that you were running back then and the groups that you had access to and the varietals that they were providing?
Yeah, I mean, the first person to ever really put me on and give me some good genetics to play with is Poncho. He kind of saw what I was doing as a small scale cultivator, growing random seeds, and said, here's some real shit. Let's see what you can do. And that was really what gave me an opportunity to see the quadruple A side of quality and really hone my skills as a gardener. And that kind of led me to meeting Heavenly Days, and we formed a really good early relationship. And he was really, really awesome to give us access to the Congolese, the sweet skunk, and we had a few others that came through there, but those two were kind of what put Wayne and I on the map back in the day as far as early flower cultivation and then live resin.
Yeah, and as you mentioned briefly about the forums, like that was a pretty significant part of our come up story. Like we were on Overgrow, IC Mag, Toke City, very much so. Toke City was a big part of what helped us connect as well as connect to other people in the industry. And that's kind of a big part of what helped us build our cultivation experience, which I guess we'll get into in a bit. But with regards to genetics, we've really always looked south in terms of some of the breeders down there that have been inspirational to the cultivators down there, namely JBZ, obviously, as well as Swamp Boys. And, Top Dog has been a big part of our come up. And they're just guys who we respect and guys who really were integral players in the forum space, and really sharing information about the most prominent genetics and what make things special. And we were really looking to those underground sources for information to find inspiration in genetics. And we've been collecting seeds since those days, and we're still popping those seeds that we've got 10 years ago. And we often find ourselves coming back to those same three breeders for sure.
Absolutely. So when you started looking through genetics and Brindle had been established, what was the first genetic varietal phenotype that you found of your own from your own selections that really stood out to you?
Yeah, it was Sour Animal. So we did a lot of seed hunts. We did some work testing seeds for Chimera, just a lot of more experimental grade seeds, and just it wasn't until Sour Animal where like you could see from across the room that was a special plant. And
yes, that one's from JBZ, Sour Diesel. It's a Sour Diesel cross, and that's like a big part of what lends to its hash ability. This was one of the first strains that really like showed us what live rosin could be. So yeah, it's a Sour Diesel to Animal Cookies cross.
And so I want to go back because I know you're talking about live rosin there. At what point? Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say we'll get to that as a focus, but yeah. That's Sour Animal. I was just trying to say, like, I think there was 100 seeds, 100 phenotypes in that run, and that one stood out as like a very clear winner amongst every single other one. So we began to realize how rare those standout strains are for sure.
And so at what year are you doing these larger pheno hunts where you're looking through these 100 plant sifts and things like that? Like, is this nearing legalization around 2016 or what year is this?
Yeah, it was when we first started going in the place that we're in now is when we were kind of able to actually dedicate a room's worth of space to these hunts as opposed to, one table or, a tent.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back before we go forward and talk about when this Brindle Farms focus moved from BHO to solventless. Like, at what point did that take place?
Do you have a time marker on it?
Not really.
You were here, right?
Yeah, so roughly 5 years ago. We were sent some jars from the States from cultivators and hash processors down south who were making live rosin before we really even knew what it was. Like, we had tried flower rosin and still preferred live resin, BHO, to flower rosin, just from like a fully a bioassay standpoint, the taste, the enjoyment factor, the potency. We were just very partial to BHO. And once receiving these specific jars, I think it was like I think one was alien cookies. There were some Cali genetics, but there were some really, really good, really like clean 70 through 120 first wash live rosin. And it just showed us like how much of a cleaner experience, how much better it feels. And it must have been that day that we really just tried to start making it, and bought the freeze dryer before we knew how to use it, bought the rosin press, bought all the big bags and everything. And it sat for a while trying to figure out what we were going to do with it. But yeah, it definitely was a big step for us.
And was there one of you that was more gung-ho than the other about the transition from solvent to solventless?
This was around the same time as we were starting to think about the legal side of things. And it was just very obvious to the two of us that trying to do BHO in the legal framework was just going up against so much more regulatory difficulty and expenses than doing ice water. And so that, alongside of just like having been doing the solvent thing for so long, like we just weren't comfortable with that, being an everyday activity. And once we started making bubble hash, pressing rosin, it just was very obvious to us, like, this is fun. This is not dangerous. This is just actually an enjoyable activity from start to finish. And so I think we were kind of equally on board with it. We kind of shared in that experience of trying that live rosin for the first time and becoming just, it was impossible to deny that we discovered a higher grade than what we were used to before.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was a tough pill to swallow, though, because not every genetic works for live rosin. Like, the genetic library that we had built focused a lot on long flowering sativas. Those are just not the strains that are really meant to, they just don't shine in a solventless extraction process. They produce unbelievable solvent-based extracts, but sometimes you'll get literally nothing back when you try wash some of these long flowering sativas. So we did kind of have to start at square one in terms of building our genetic library again, which we were focused on doing entirely from seed, which is when those large pheno hunts began. And yeah, like, just to step a little back in terms of this property, I think it's important to address. Right now we're located in the Souk Business Park. This used to be a logging yard, and an individual developed this yard. He's the owner of another cannabis brand here, and he developed this yard and created a specific zoning focused on the medical production of cannabis. So individuals who could come here, rent a space from the owner, and they could cultivate under medical license without worrying about repercussions. It was literally in the zoning. So he began to sell properties in this park, and they were under that zoning. It's a literal medical marijuana zoning. So we spoke to him, we were interested. We knew that we would be, comfortable getting multi-100 plant licenses under ACMPR on this property. We had 4 medical licenses at the same time here, and we knew it would be okay. And we were assured by the city, as well as the strata who manages this property, as well as the owners, that they would be pushing for any sort of zoning that's required come recreational, which they did follow through with. They created specific recreational zoning in this park. It's one of very few places in Canada that you're going to find zoning specifically created for the commercial production and processing of cannabis. It's very strict how it's laid out. It is kind of tough that you have to have architects involved. You have to have a very high level of standards when you're creating these businesses and these buildings. They're higher standards than Health Canada even has to do. Like, the first thing on a Health Canada license is you must appease local zoning laws. And here, the local zoning laws specified the use of architects and, very, very strict rules in terms of water input, water output, drainage, waste, all of those things that you have to satisfy before Health Canada would even consider you. So we were very lucky to find this space, and it had a lot to do with encouraging us to move forward. We own this property, so we're not paying anyone rent, and that really incentivized us to move forward. We run this business ourselves. We don't have employees, so with no rent and no overhead, it really makes it feasible for sure.
At what point did you make that investment
Into the property?
Yeah, to purchase the property.
Well, yeah, we got a private mortgage on it, so we are paying it off slowly.
My question to you is, at what point did you move in and start working out of the property? Like, was that early 2016?
Yeah, it was like 2.5 years prior to recreational legalization.
That's incredible, man. That's super cool that you guys had the foresight and identified those partners and kind of thought that through, because I think that a lot of people scrambled for a long time and didn't really go into it with a plan. And I think having a plan that far in advance, really speaks to the thought that you put into it. So I commend you for that.
And this was the first space that we really knew we were going to build it once and do it right. So there's not a single piece of wood in our grow. Ever since the medical days, everything is done right. Plastic walls, epoxy floors, metal table supports, everything is done without cutting a single corner. And when it came time to actually move into the recreational space, we really didn't have to change that much, which spoke to our standards that we had employed since the beginning. Like, we were pretty much ready to make that transition without having to change much at all.
Let's talk about your cultivation space. You guys have been cultivating for many years. Brennan, what was the evolution for you from, single-ended, air-cooled, high-pressure sodium? Like, did you stick with HPS for many years? Were you an early transitioner to LED? What's your medium of choice? How'd that go?
I'd say we're kind of still proponents of double-ended lighting for overall resin quality. And we made the move to double-ended lighting, I would say, pretty early in its technology, it being an option.
We spent $1,200-$1,300 per light for Gavita lights, and remember how much that hurt, but we were really impressed by them.
And so it was always looking at it kind of more mathematically and being able to raise more powerful lights higher, spread your lighting wider, use less fixtures, less overall power. And if you had enough air conditioning to kind of handle the fixtures being in the room, because back in the day, we were kind of used to offsetting that heat in a separate space. And, you could get away with putting the ballast in the crawl space and it would just stay nice and warm in there. And, it was typically not prepared in the latent heat loads to have them in the room. So it was just a bit of an adjustment back then. And really back then, the really hardest thing was there wasn't Instagram grow guides. There wasn't like pictorial, like you just had to figure stuff out through text on the forums. And it was a lot more difficult to figure out whose information was credible and whose information wasn't credible. And I think that's where Wayne and I's history degrees kind of really did serve us a lot of benefit in being able to decipher this information and just at least approach it in a very similar mindset.
And what was your chosen media? Like, are you cultivating rockwool or cocoa or living soil?
So I started out in the traditional peat soil, and we ran Lucas formula with general hydroponics nutrients for the longest time. Made the switch after doing a side-by-side comparison with cocoa, running the same nutrients, and saw much better growth that way. So that was when I started to get into more automated irrigation as well. It's kind of a necessity once you make the move to cocoa in small pots. And wasn't until getting into cultivation here and thinking more of cultivating and compliance and how those things intersect together, that we've incorporated rock wool cubes. Just, it's a lot easier to move plants around and make no mess. And it's also a very clean start every time.
Yeah, so right now we're doing a pretty hybrid technique. We take clones into rock wool plugs, and then the clones will go into 4x4 rock wool cubes for veg. We just find it super easy. You can soak the cubes to their maximum water content, set them down on the table, put the clones in, and then by the time they dry down that first time, they're already rooted. You just keep them at the water content that you want, and it's just a really easy veg thing. It's uniform. And then we take those 4x4 veg cubes and we put them on top of a cocoa bag. And so they're going to probably root for a couple days where they're getting shots every hour. And then from there, they act as one uniform thing. The top cube dries out to pretty much nothing, and it essentially acts as a cocoa flowering medium. So we're gaining the advantages of a high-speed rock wool vegetation and then combining it with cocoa for flowering. We've done flowering in both. We find there is benefits to having like the microbiology that exists within a cocoa flowering medium.
That was my question. Very interesting. I think that's a cool hybridization. And I think as we go forward, we're going to see more and more hybridization between these cultivation methodologies that were once kind of taught as, if you do this, you can't do that. So that's really cool that you guys switch from veg to flower, from rock wool to cocoa. Do you find any issues like during that transitionary period when those roots are setting into the cocoa?
Nope, they seem to love it. We always make sure that the 4x4 cube is well rooted before being placed on top. And if you've ever placed a rock wool cube on top of anything, whether it's rock wool, cocoa, whatever, you'll notice that the bottom medium is going to wick the moisture from the cube. So if you just place a 4x4 cube on top of a cocoa pot, it's going to wick it to dry pretty much over the course of an hour or two. So we're giving that top cube really small shots every hour, even through the night phase for the first couple days, just to make sure that that top cube is staying in the 30 to 50% moisture, and it's going to force it to look for water down low. And then once we go up and we shake it a little and we see that it's clung, then we'll cut the watering off and let the bottom pot dry down. So it is kind of a little bit of a dance, but when you do it right, you're really gaining the benefits from all types of mediums. So it's something unique to us, but it's also something a lot of others that have inspired us do as well, for sure.
Are you putting biology into your feed once you're into flower, or are you depending on the biology that's inoculated into the cocoa mix prior?
Yeah, like this is going to come to our discussion of why we're not doing living soil. We in the legal space, every single product we create is tested for microbiological, contaminant. Contaminant is not even the right word to use because they're testing for the presence of microbiology in your samples. And so for us, we're fresh frozen, we're freezing our entire crop. But before that crop can go to the processor, we have to present a clean COA showing that the microbiology is under the allowable amounts by Health Canada. And the processor won't take the cannabis before we can prove that. And, it's just always been a worry that if you're literally cultivating microbiology in the medium, that you're increasing the chances of potentially failing these tests. I'm not saying that you can't cultivate cannabis that would pass tests in a living soil space, but we find it's going to be difficult. And, the potential losses of foregoing an entire crop due to microbiological contamination is a lot to consider. And then there's the other argument of consistency, where we just find that, we've refined our genetics to the point where we can create products that we want to from each respective genetic, and we can do it consistently because we know the recipes of what to feed those genetics and what they expect in each of their respective weeks of flower. When you're cultivating a living soil that, is changing state and composition from crop to crop, you can't expect to have a consistent product forever in perpetuity. So between those two factors, that's what have steered us towards drip irrigation. And we stand by it. We definitely do not ever talk down upon living soil. We find that the products that have grown from living soil have the potential to be equal or greater. I've never been proven empirically that one is better than the other in terms of the resin that it can create. Some genetics prefer one medium to another, undeniably. But yeah, we would never talk down upon living soil cultivation methods. It's just it fits us to use salt-based inputs.
Will you pheno hunt differently than you would cultivate a room for commercial fresh frozen?
What do you mean by that?
Like when you're setting yourselves up for a pheno hunt, are you still running that same methodology that you would be if you were running a room for fresh frozen, or are you slightly modifying your methodologies, perhaps using smaller cubes or smaller plants? Like, do you run everything the same as you would with a commercial flower room when you're pheno hunting, or would it
We do our best to, like we kind of have our program. There's flexibility in the way we feed and our irrigation strategies. But if something's not going to work in our program, it's just not going to work in our facility. And, that's kind of how we approach it. So it is about pheno hunting within this framework and finding the strains that are going to agree with our veg times and the way that we like to train our plants, and as well as just the feed strengths and that side of things. So we do our best to mimic the plant size and also just run the exact same feed programs.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about your lab. Are you guys running a machine, or are you hand washing?
We're hand washing in 65 gal bruteless basins. So we kind of operate two of them staggered at the same time.
And what kind of bags are you using?
We receive into a 32-gallon bruteless setup, and we use a stock set of fresh Headies bubble bags to collect into.
And are you guys proponents of a specific way of washing? Like, do you feel as though one direction without many turns, or are you how do you guys like to wash?
A big thing that we think is important is like a consistent motion. So, like staying the same speed and keeping the material moving in the vortex and just kind of avoiding that dead space from being able to occur. And I would say that we don't really like abrupt changes back and forth where you can kind of feel the material smacking against the paddle. And again, you're kind of working against yourself over time when you wash that way, right?
Yeah, I think you're creating more work for yourself down the road, and ultimately sacrificing quality. But what are your thoughts on fresh press? Like, is that something that you're big fans of, or do you tend to prefer more cold cure?
On a personal level, we'll press for ourselves and we'll smoke it fresh off the press. But on a commercial standpoint, the stability of fresh press is obviously what brings it into question for us. We find that it's very rare that you'll find genetics that you press it fresh and leave it on the table and it doesn't butter. Like it often requires some level of post-processing, whether it be whatever people do, cold cure, heat mat, anything, something to preserve the state we find is necessary. So yeah, anything we're putting into a jar on the recreational market has had its level of post-processing to make sure that it's going to stay wet and it's not going to dry out into a butter.
I want to ask, is the bruteless wash vessels by specific choice, or are you open to commercial wash vessels?
We are open to commercial wash vessels. At the time of kitting out this processing space, it was a long time ago, and equipment had to be approved through the quality assurance person. And it just, we had our working list and we watched the industry evolve a little past that list. We kind of, our decision to use the fresh Headies bubble bags is just staying true to the same bags we've always used. And we looked at the 65-gallon bruteless as just something that was simple enough that we could be sure it wasn't going to ruin our process in some capacity. As we kind of get moving forward and get our feet off the ground here, we're really starting to see the, both sides of having hand washing, and we're really just, I want to see automated washer work in front of my eyes and learn its ins and outs before I kind of hop on board with one of them.
Absolutely. Do you have a conceptual preference between top agitation and bottom agitation?
The bottom agitation is kind of just always weirded me out as far as
That's where the hash wants to settle, right?
yeah, exactly. And as well as the material, if it's not, being spun quite quickly. So this is where I feel like all of these machines have their pros and cons and nuances. And, looking back to my experience with purchasing a closed loop extractor for BHO, it's like at the beginning, everything's got an extra zero. Everything is just you're paying to be the guinea pig. The new revised model comes out by the time you're landing yours. So we're just kind of being a little patient.
And yeah, like we're very happy to stay true to our hand washing approach. We are small scale. We're able to hand wash our product. So why not? Once we can be proven that a machine can help us along, that's cool. We definitely feel like we are throwing away a decent amount of material. We'll wash it by hand for a full 8-hour day. And then, the material is still kind of producing hash. And, there's the option of throwing it in one of these automated washers, letting it run overnight, coming back to the lab next day, getting a bunch of edible grade hash that you might have thrown away before. These type of things are important because obviously the bottom line is a big factor in keeping a company afloat, and you can't afford to be throwing products away. So we are intrigued by the idea of it, but we will not sacrifice quality to improve efficiency. It doesn't really make sense to us to do such a thing.
Do you feel quality can be achieved at the same level as hand washing with commercial automated washing vessels currently?
We hope to be proven so.
Yeah, like I don't feel like I have enough firsthand experience of trying a product that's been made with automated washers and being able to form any comparison. But just trying to think about it fairly, like your employees get tired over the workday, like are they really going to operate at the same consistent speed as a washer that's set correctly? Like I see the potential there 100%.
Yeah, we're not closed-minded to a variable speed being able to be more consistent. As you said, it's definitely intriguing.
So I want to touch on hash yields because I know it's something that you guys have even referenced to in the big earlier in our chat. And what are your thoughts on the standardization, or how are you quantifying your rooms and the yields that are coming off? Are you still yielding within a certain micron of loose resin, or are you judging rosin per square foot? Like, how have you best been able to quantify that metric for your business?
I mean, it's kind of misleading when someone's going to make reference to getting such and such yield, and then you learn that a bunch of it is like total food grade product and stuff that we might not even be extracting, or at least not considering as usable product. So I think for Wayne and I, we have 2 SKUs making it to market from our product. We're doing vape cartridges as well as just a single grams. And so I kind of consider anything that can make it into those 2 SKUs as part of my overall percentage. And then everything else is kind of ignored.
Do you feel as though we're gonna be able to come together as an industry in solventless and figure out a better way to quantify these yields and communicate with each other? Or do you feel that that's a fool's errand and that more than likely we're just going to have to figure it out ourselves like we have been?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own reason to manipulate that side of the coin to fit their narrative, whatever they're trying to prove at the time. So it is a difficult thing to put into, some type of empirical, factual measurement. But as we start to see genetics being marketed and seeds being sold with advertised yields with them, like it really brings to question, like what is that yield referring to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Back to preferences. Are you guys more melt smokers or rosin smokers?
Definitely rosin smokers over here for sure.
Yeah, like chasing the dragon of getting the melt to the quality where it's truly an enjoyable product to consume. I mean, my hat's off to those that are about that life, but I think for Wayne and I, we're just kind of about creating the terpiest, most potent, clean product on a consistent basis. And we're able to kind of maximize our output of that product using rosin. And we've built our washing program around trying to get the most amount out in the first wash to kind of have the terpiest pull of the greatest amount, and that's what we're putting out as our grams of rosin.
What's your thought there to kind of, when you say get the most out on the first wash and have the terpiest pull, is it that the second pull has, less desirable glands and that the first pull is going to have a higher terpene content?
I think it's a little bit of that, and it's also just that you've had to rinse water over that material more times to get to that second wash end result. And in doing so, you're stripping that resin from its volatile compounds. And what Wayne and I have noticed is, the difference from first to second to third to fourth, it's very strain dependent. With some strains, it's a very obvious step down. With other strains, it's a very subtle step down. And so there's a lot of discretion of the extractor of, how do you combine things to make the highest quality product in the end. And we've definitely noticed that there is, no matter what, like a step down as far as flavor and potency, wash to wash to wash.
Interesting. Has that been across the board with all cultivars that you've experimented with?
Well, like some will produce very high grade consumable hash for 3-4 washes, whereas in it might be like a consistent amount that comes out in the first 3 washes, whereas other strains will get a massive amount in the first wash that drops off extremely heavily by the second. And for something like the latter, we would never include the second and the first. But for something like the first example, where the first 4 washes are quite consistent, it might just make sense to combine the first 2 or 3 to create a consistent product. But again, it's based on our discretion to make sure that what we're putting in a jar is unadulterated. We're only putting the 70, 90, 120 in the jar. We're discluding the 160 and the 45, which a lot of people are, understanding that full spec is a good thing when they include 45 and 160. We don't believe that it is. We stand behind just putting the 70, 90, and 120. And that's, we just like, it's going to be each strain's different for sure. Like sometimes we're including the first and second in the jars. Sometimes it's literally just the first wash of a 10-minute wash.
And how Brindle works, or how Brindle Farms works currently, or how you're set up in the legal space now, are you purely supplying the flower from your cultivation that goes out as Brindle, or are you going to be working with other cultivators?
No, everything that has the brand Brindle Farms on it, we pheno hunted it, we grew it, we made that hash and put it in a package with the help of the guys at Old Growth Collective. But we're minority owners in that processor. We go there, we put on our suits and we make the hash, we press the hash, and they help us put it into a jar and help us put it out to market. But realistically, we're involved in every single part of the process from beginning to end. So we definitely do not license our brand or our genetics to anyone else. And we take pride in touching every single plant as it grows every single day, for sure.
That's very cool. How important do you think it's going to be to have your own genetics that are unique to your brand as things move forward and mature in the industry?
I think that's the key to success, to be honest, for sure. And it's another part of that is to keep it constantly evolving. Like any connoisseur, any consumer, they want the next best thing. They want the new thing. They want to try what everyone else is talking about. And as growers and cultivators, we need to be a year ahead of those people. So we've already found our cut. We're already growing it and we know how to extract it and we've built a recipe for it. It takes a long time, but again, it helps to look down south to a lot of the influencers down there in the cannabis space. Like they're determining a lot of what is going to be hot in the future. And if we can stay on that pulse and be ready to bring those things to market as people want them, then I think that's where we'll find success.
Interesting. So have you played at all with any type of semi-cured Jesus tech, like partial dry experience, or are you just doing whole plant fresh frozen?
It's something that's on our radar. Like we are really, really passionate about bringing sativa haze rosin into the legal atmosphere, bringing it back into our lives. And definitely seems like that can be a big part of getting a yield out of these strains. So I can't say that we've tried it yet, but we do certainly intend to.
I was going to ask you, Brennan, it's interesting that, one of the strains being the Congo was, brought in and championed by you guys. Are you drawn to those sativas as well as the heavy indicas, or are you just purely looking for that sedative vibe?
The thing that always resonated with me was like, I am a pothead. I love this plant. I consume it all day. So my decision to consume it before bed is like that one session a day.
Yeah.
So it's like there's all the rest of the day.
There's all the morning and afternoons.
Yeah, and these hazes aren't for everybody, as I'm sure you've seen. It's heart thumping, can induce anxiety. But I've always just got the focus, the clear headed. Like I definitely got through university writing essays super high on sativas. That's just what I loved.
Yeah, and just the complexity of the flavors, the uniqueness, it's something special. It's truly like when you open a jar and can make people like impressed and wowed, not offended, not off-put, but pleased, like a candy. And those flavors are just not quite found in the indica dominant sedative family of flavors. And yeah, we definitely have a passion for sativas, absolutely.
Do you feel like with breeding we're going to be able to bring down those flower times but still maintain those profiles and effects, or do you feel that there's an inherent trade-off that happens when you're shortening up those flower times, that you're not able to get those really interesting, almost psychoactive effects?
Yeah, the flowering time is not what intimidates us. We grow a pretty standard 12-week flowering time. Like anything that flowers in 9 weeks, we're usually off-put by it because we're like, that flower's too fast. It's probably not developing the complexity that we're looking for. And we're often right when it comes down to that. Like the stuff that we pheno hunt, it wants over 11 weeks, usually 12. So it's more just the actual feel of it. Like when you go into a grow room or outdoors and you touch a plant and it's wet and it leaves that like literally liquid feeling on your fingers, that is not what you want when you're looking for solventless extracts. You want it to be sticky and dry. And like, yeah, we can definitely through breeding, I'm sure we can get the sativa profile and effects with, it's more so just the literal structure of the resin head that needs to be refined to make it more suitable for the mechanical extraction of solventless.
You're running your flower rooms in the legal cannabis space at 12 weeks?
Oh yeah. See, that's a big part of it is we're owner operator. Nobody's telling us we got to flower on a certain schedule. Nobody's telling us what genetics we have to grow. And we make those choices. When we want to pre-veg for a couple weeks, we do that. And there's nobody who's going to be upset by that.
That's really cool. I've got a lot of respect for that. I don't think many people in the legal Canadian market are flowering longer than 10, to be honest with you. So that's a definite unique factor. And I think so. Like, what are you guys' thoughts on the Canadian market as a whole? It's been a really rough go. You guys are a true transition story from the legacy into the legal space now. Are things about to get a lot better, or is it going to be a struggle going forward for the next few years?
I mean, it's kind of this catch-22 at this point where the legal side of things wants to reflect this attitude that high quality is not a thing that's going to work. The buyers aren't there. This attitude of like that it's somehow only in the black market where that can succeed. But we saw this with flour already. Like there was no good flour available in the rec market. No one was shopping for it there. Now we've kind of evolved to where there are some choices. We're starting to see those customers come back. We're starting to see brands be able to gain some traction that way. And all of a sudden we have a market evolving. And so I foresee that same opportunity happening with extracts. It just takes a bunch of brands actually doing the work and putting out product that's worthy of consuming and kind of pushing these retailers to open their eyes and see the opportunity to get these customers back in their door. And so it's been really cool so far to see the reaction of our product and just have people start to see that it is possible for rec products to maintain that same level of quality.
Can you talk a little bit about the products that you mentioned that you're bringing a cold cure and a pen to market? Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, so we came out to market with 3 strains: sour animal, animal style, and LA Kush Cake. They're, like Wayne said, we pheno hunted the 3 of these strains. We've selected our phenos. We were able to bring our genetics over in our micro application process. And so these are plants that we pheno hunted in the same facility that we're now growing them in the micro. So we were really had an opportunity to hone in our SOPs from the cultivation side to have a very consistent output every time on quality, cannabinoids, all of that side of things. And as far as with what we've chosen to bring to market, we really wanted to just stay true to putting the best possible single grams out. We just really want to be part of that force of dispelling that notion of, like premium rec can't exist. And we want to show people it can, and we want to show them with the stuff that Wayne and I like to dab. That's the attitude that we've taken there. Like just try and put forth that true Percy grade product. And then the vape pen side of things is really an opportunity for us to get our brand in the hands of, the everyday smoker, the person who's not as interested in solventless and all of that. But in doing our little bit of, customer research, seeing what people think about these solventless pens, they kind of sell themselves, and the fact that like they're a lot better than a distillate pen. And so we're just about to get those out and start to see what people think of them, but we're really, really excited about that opportunity. We think that we've really been able to make a super, super impressive product for that type of consumer.
Did each of the varietals go into pen as well, or are you only selecting 1 or 2 of those to work into the pens?
Yeah, we chose not to put the animal style out in a pen. We just find its cannabinoid to terpene ratio is really not what you want for a good pen. It's not going to flow correctly.
Yeah.
So rather than trying to, cook it down to get it to work or, take some type of shortcut, we just chose not to release that one in a pen form.
What are your thoughts on jams? Is it something that you've done a lot of exploration in, or something that you haven't preferred to kind of stay away from?
So a big thing for us is like, rather than taking our totality of our rosin, heat teching it or cold curing it, we're making an action to a portion of it, and then we're conglomerating it back with the original rosin. And we're doing that, like Wayne said, to kind of focus on stability and focus on shelf life. And I personally don't like the idea of applying heat to something as a whole that we've really spent a huge effort of keeping cold up to the point before that, right?
So are you talking about, like, say if you potentially have some drier rosin that you're taking out a portion and then jamming it out and then re-adding that to create a wetter or better, more malleable offering? Absolutely. So what are the biggest challenges? What were the biggest challenges for you to get to market, being, a small cultivator, an entrepreneurial self-funded startup? Like, I'm sure there were more than 20, but what was the biggest one, the biggest frustration for you guys?
I think kind of everybody says this, but the slow speed at which things move forward.
Yeah, everything takes time. We were lucky enough to be growing under medical licensing at the time. So we were kind of the attitude, like, let it take as long as it needs to. We're pretty happy here. But, like, we had the luxury of being able to be in that position. If you were finding a space and then renting it with the intention of licensing it and building a business, you're in for a really long time of paying rent without earning money. And that's like a massive obstacle for people. And there's no real way around that unless you're going to buy yourself a space and be able to monetize it until the time of licensing, for sure.
And, like, do you see changes coming? Like, I know with BC, these new regulations, you recently were able to do a drop directly with Sunrise. That must have been pretty cool, coming full circle. Do you think that in the future, people are going to be able to insure a cold chain for you, and you're going to be able to deliver products, potentially fresh press or potentially, other products?
Yeah, absolutely. Farm gate sales is already in discussion in Canada. Like, things are changing every year, always for the positive. At the very beginning, you remember them talking about processors having to have literal bank vaults with cement walls on their premises. And then they changed that. And everyone who built these bank vaults, they have them now, and they had to spend that money. And that's just the cost of early entry. That's just going to be the way it is. But yeah, things are becoming more lenient, more approachable, and Health Canada is becoming more accepting year to year. So I really do think that it is progressing towards a better space. We've found things like the direct delivery that you've mentioned are making this just a much more appealing space to be in. The BC provincial government was intaking extracts, having them sit in a non-air conditioned warehouse before distributing them to stores. Now we're able to overnight ship or courier on ice direct to stores, and we can have a direct personal relationship with the stores, see what they're ordering, make sure that their customers are happy, that their bud tenders are educated, and we can just really play a larger role in terms of the distribution of our product, which is extremely glorifying for sure.
Talking about playing a larger role, how important do you think it is as craft producers and owners of a small brand to control that path to market that you currently do?
Well, we can't control it. We can't determine which store is going to buy our products, So there might be a really small store in rural BC that opts to buy through direct delivery, and we have to fulfill that order. We can't turn it down. Okay. So yes, there might be stores that intake our product that don't know how to treat it and they don't know how to describe it, but we are informed of those purchases. So we can see on the back end which stores are ordering, and we're taking that personal initiative to reach out to those stores, talk to their managers, make an effort to educate their bud tenders. And we do this because we want to. We have a passion for it. We want to make sure that our products are well represented. And, we take a personal role in doing that for sure. So we've already created and established relationships with every store that plans to carry our products for sure.
That's amazing. Would you say that you guys anticipated legalization in the way it unfolded fairly well, or did you have a much different assumption of how this was going to look?
I don't know if we had anything
the same thing.
Like, we've been to California like twice. He's been to Colorado once. We don't have like the most exposure to legal markets in general. Our experience of going into dispensaries has always been kind of hush hush. Like, a lot of the time you're going into a back office at a desk and dealing with people in the corner. Like, that was our experience of it. Going to California, you have the big flashy stores and all the brands and marketing, and it's still a baby in Canada. It's still developing, like, we're really restricted in terms of our packaging, in terms of the marketing, in terms of imagery that we can use and advertising that we can do. And it would be fun to explore those options as they become allowable, but we need to be really careful in terms of doing things by the book and making sure that we follow those rules for sure.
What grade would you give Canada for legalization? Like, would you give them a passing grade? Would you give them an A plus? Like, what, as far as, how they did bringing this into a federal legalization, do you think they did a good job?
I mean, I think one of the really big things is that they created this program on a federal level, and a lot of it fell onto a municipal level to put into action. And they didn't give any guidance on a municipal level. So they expect these small towns or these overburdened, huge municipalities to have time or energy to develop these rule sets, to then be responsible for having developed these rule sets. And really what we experienced at the beginning was like no one wanted to stick their neck out and do anything, because they're like, we're just more comfortable dragging our feet and not having any opportunity for anything to go wrong in this space in the municipalities. And so we've seen a lot of change there. We're starting to at least see like workable models that have proven to at least create, the right liabilities and the right assurances in place. Like here, like we had to satisfy a lot of hoops, but in the end, they all kind of came from a reason of safety. And I kind of see that as the model moving forward, at least for the foreseeable future. And in saying that, from a cultivator's point of view, it's really just about determining like what is the bare minimum to satisfy these regulations and still have a sound complex, but not go over the top just to satisfy the rule sets. The way that Health Canada made the rules is very vague. They don't specify exactly what building material meets their rule sets. They just say it has to meet these following specs, and some of their descriptions of specs leave you, open to interpret it to, does a black and white poly on the wall meet the specs? Like it's hard to say. No one's really tried to figure out where the bottom is. And I think in learning this, we'll start to see what it takes as far as a facility to get it into the system, and hopefully our experience will start to encourage others to at least see the possibility of an existence on the other side.
Yeah, I think it's going to take trailblazers like yourselves. I think it's going to take legacy brands pulling legacy producers or legacy consumers into those stores. I mean, I think something that you said that resonated with me was, this constant drivel that from new industry participants on the legal side saying that this whole quality thing isn't going to cut the cheese anymore, and that we got to do a marketing campaign and we got to package the mids up. And I think that having 12-week varietals in stores and available is really what's going to drive those discerning consumers in. I mean, we just had Slurm on, and I said the same thing, knowing that I can go grab something from your wash bin at the dispensary down the street changes the way I look at that dispensary if I'm out of rosin for the day or the week or the hour. So I think that having those options is going to pull individuals out of the woodwork that the Deloittes and other accounting firms of the world maybe didn't count in their projections and market assumptions.
Right. And these stores need stories to tell. The stores are just as excited about this as we are, because they get to carry our product and tell our story. When you walk into a store and someone asks, what do you guys think is good? And the bud tender has Aurora or Afria to choose between, and that's all they can tell their customer about. It's not very exciting, but when you have true craft stories and products that come from cultivators who are passionate about the products and have been in that store to introduce themselves and tell that story, the stores are excited about it, and speaking on that Canadian legalization assessment, like, we're extremely excited. We can't be thankful enough for the opportunity to do this. In the end of the day, we had a brand prior to legalization. Health Canada is well aware of our history and what we do now, and they're supportive of it. They want to be bringing people from the legacy market into this new industry. They realize that we are essentially the backbone of bringing the customers who supported the legacy market into the recreational market. And so they're super supportive, like a lot of the stores that we're working with now, like Sunrise, we worked with 8 to 10 years ago in an entirely different framework. And both of us on completely different levels have come to the recreational space, and we're serving the same customers that we did 8 to 10 years ago. And that's just super cool. So I think just to live in a country that we have that opportunity, we're super blessed. And I think to ignore that opportunity is ignorant. Like, we want to build a brand that we're proud of. We want to build something with value. We want to build something we can tell our kids and friends about. And we're lucky to live in a country that we can do that.
Absolutely, man. I agree with you. It's fun to get to do what we do every day. I want to ask you about advice that you have for individuals who are following in your footsteps, who maybe have smaller brands with smaller footprints in the legacy space, who are looking to get and to make that breakthrough. What pieces of advice do you have for those individuals to maybe save some of the heartbreak that you've experienced along the way?
Well, I'd say first step is to just give it a try, and that you don't really need consultants off the bat. Because the way it works with Health Canada, you can submit an application in its most simplistic form, and their reply is going to tell you your deficiencies in said application and where your shortcomings are. So yes, you need to have a facility constructed before you can apply to Health Canada for a license, but the facility does not need to be outfitted. You don't need lights, you don't need HVAC, you don't need anything inside except for the literal walls itself. So yes, you need to have a facility, but it doesn't need to be outfitted. So it's important to know the nuances. And then once that facility is licensed, the things that you put inside there are really up to you. You don't have to buy the most expensive equipment. A lot of people are becoming licensed with extremely small spaces. As small as 6 to 12 lights have received a microcultivation license. So as long as the city is okay with it and Health Canada doesn't identify deficiencies, then you're going to make it through. And you don't need expensive consultants to tell you what might be shortcomings. You can just apply and then find out through the process for sure. It's definitely a lot more lenient than you might expect it to be based on like the level to which a lot of licensed producers have built their facilities.
Brennan, what's one lesson that you wished you learned earlier in your hash making career that you would pass down to other hash makers?
The importance of having very solid communication between the person cultivating the cannabis and the person doing the extracting. I think in the pheno hunting process, a lot of the time, it's not necessarily known whether that specific run of material was the best run or maybe a not so great run. How long was it flowered? There's all of these details that can be tweaked along the way that can maybe take something from a 7 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10. And you might just accept that product or that pheno as being a 7 out of 10 if you're not aware of all of these nuances on the cultivation side. So I think that's really where we've been able to find plants we consider keepers, is after they intrigue us from a terpene point of view or an effect point of view, and we really put in the work over time of cultivating them over and over again under slightly different processes until we figure out, is it a strain that likes heavy lighting? Is it a strain that likes lower lighting? Is it a strain that will be more aggressively drying down and require more irrigation? It's just like things that take a lot of time to figure out. And it's not until you've figured them out, grown it out to what you really feel is its maximum potential, to where you can really make your call in that sense. And, that's something that I see is kind of lost in translation a lot of the time with people who are newer to making hash.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've talked about where, if you don't have a good eye, there could be amazing plants right in front of you, and you're not going to select them, you're not going to grab them, you're not going to keep them, you're not going to save them. So I think that, that all comes with experience, and definitely something that you have.
And you're not going to find a keeper in every pack.
100%.
That's a big thing. Just like be prepared to just scrap them all and go on to the next one.
Yeah, 100%. I wanted to talk about the 3 plants you brought to market. We touched on their names, but we didn't really touch on their flavor profiles. You selected these from seed, so I'm sure that these all are pretty unique in their flavor profiles to your selection. So can you take us through those 3 varietals and touch on the flavor notes that you get from those 3?
Yeah, so the LA Kush Cake is a cross of wedding cake to Kush mints. And it's a pretty interesting strain in that I feel like over the course of time of us having it, and it's just reactivity to different crop cycles, it has a tendency to lean in either direction of its parents. You can get the really creamy wedding cake side of things to come out of it. And then on other crop cycles, you'll really get the more spicy Bubba influence of the Kush mints coming out. And so that's kind of always been our nighttime strain. That one's just got potency all over it. When we originally did our pheno hunt, we were still flower smokers, was a part of our decision making at that point in time. And I remember the first time Wayne and I smoked that one up, like we both just went home and took naps on our own accord. And the animal style is a cross from Swamp Boys, who we've both met on different occasions. They're super awesome dudes. We love that we're able to bring one of their strains to market with kind of their full support of doing so. And it's a cross of animal cookies to GMO TK skunk. And the GMO is on the male side of the cross that came to be here. And we had a lot of phenos in that hunt that leaned more to the animal cookies side, but they just didn't really have a commercial production, and the resin quality wasn't really there from the rosin side. And so we picked kind of the most GMO dominant one that we found in that pack. And it really still has a huge influence from the animal cookies side. So they come together really, really in an interesting way, because they're both kind of spicy, deep flavors. So they blend together as opposed to combating each other really well.
Yeah, and that one's a super fun one to grow. It has that GMO influence, which definitely intimidates a lot of growers, but we grow with a double-ended lighting with 16-foot ceilings in our grow room. So we love the super stretchy plants, and we like to let that plant express herself, and she'll get 7 feet tall sometimes. And it's just like the animal cookies will help bring density and structure to what would otherwise be very airy buds that the GMO is known for putting out. So it does flower really long, like somewhere in the 77, 80 days range, but it gets super, super long spears that look like they have animal cookies buds on them. So they're like dense, Kush-looking buds on the super elongated structure of a GMO. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds in terms of our preference.
Will that dump in the first wash, or does that dump later?
No, that's a super, super dry to the feel one, and we'll get 80% of our yields in the first wash.
Wow.
And then that's followed up by much smaller, much lower quality washes to follow.
And what was your final cultivar?
It's called Sour Animal. So that's a sour diesel cross to an animal mint back cross, and that was kind of the first strain that put us on the Seed Junkie map. And we were growing or pheno hunting for hash at this point. So we'd have our one or two of every plant. It was one of each on that pheno hunt. And I remember when it came time to extract that plant, I said to Wayne, I bet you this one does twice as much as all the other ones do. And we were just lucky enough that when we stuck our noses in that bag, not only was it like a good yield, but it was just such a complex, insane representation of the plant. It really was the first time where we felt like it just did it justice in the same way that be it like live resin could do, as far as bringing you that experience of being around the plant while it's still alive.
But it's also notably one that we wouldn't have selected for a flower program. Like, it's also really long flowering, and it's also pretty scraggly and hard to get it to put in focus into buds. So you're usually getting like a very large amount of small buds that aren't really well developed, and it's hard to get a lot of weight per light. But none of that really matters to us when we consider the quality of the resin that it creates and the uniqueness of the profile. So it's definitely a mainstay for us, for sure. Special one.
That's incredible. So what's the plan going forward for how Brindle brings cultivars to market? Are these going to be mainstay flavors, and then there's going to be new things that come in, or will these be cycled out and new things be cycled in? What's your plan there?
So we were able to make a pretty sizable genetic declaration as part of our application. And so, like we mentioned before, we really want to make an effort to, have our brand satisfy that connoisseur diversity, and really, not have you just be like, oh, great, sour animal again. Like, we really just want to keep it coming with new flavors. And something we're really excited about is, bringing these new exclusive flavors into the legal channel and seeing, like how many of these legacy customers are going to get up and go and get them when that's the new only way to get it, right? Like, I don't think the Canadian industry has really evolved to that point where anyone's made that move yet. So we're just really excited to keep our pheno hunts going and stay true to what I said before. You don't find a keeper in every pack, and you just have to have that standard of only letting ones get into commercial production that meet that standard of the rest of the cuts that we have.
Yeah, and we'd like to have help from our customers and let them help us decide which strains do well, judge reactions. With tissue culture, we have the option of banking strains, putting them away for years at a time, and then coming back and bringing them back again in the future. We don't think that we would ever kill off sour animal and never grow it again, but there's a good chance we'll bank it through tissue culture and then let it have a resurgence in the future. But our cultivation space is limited. Under micro cultivation licensing, we're only allowed just over 2,000 square feet of canopy space. That canopy space includes your mothers, it includes your clones, it includes whatever pheno hunting that you're going to be doing as well. So we have to be very considerate on the way we allocate those square feet. And as consumers ourselves, we want the new best thing. We want the next interesting thing. And that's what we plan to bring to customers. We want to always be introducing new things. And if there's interest in bringing back a mainstay, we're always open to that as well, for sure.
Are you guys comfortable with the 2,150 square foot canopy that you currently occupy? Or are you going to, quickly look to expand into a different license or location?
I think we're very comfortable with our size of operation right now. I think a big, dance of this whole play we're making is that the industry is not quite there from a just ready to swallow up these crops whole point of view. So we're happy we're not burning any more than we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to stay true to our mentality of growing each plant ourselves and extracting it ourselves. We do have the potential for expansion, but we can't grow fields of weed and do it without employees and have a hands-on approach to every single plant and then make the hash ourselves. And those aren't things we might have to always be doing 10, 20 years down the line. But as we build this brand, it's really important to us that we take a hands-on approach to every single product we put out, and we can't let quality be sacrificed by expansion.
That's very admirable, and you know, not an attitude often taken in the legal space. So I commend you guys for that. And I think, you know, from what you're doing, everything from the 12-week flower cycles to just owning your own cultivation facility, minority ownership in the processor, and getting in there and, you know, being the guys at the wash bin. I mean, that is everything that you want to hear, you know, about a hash company. So, you know, hats off to you guys. Good job. That's very cool. I wanted to kind of give you guys the opportunity, and I know you had mentioned that a lot of it was self-taught and through the forums, but you know, opportunity to shout out anybody or any individuals or groups that, you know, really helped you along your way. I know you had mentioned Heavenly Days. Were there any other groups that you wanted to shout out right now?
Well, like in the old school Overgrow IC Mag days, there were guys who inspired us into learning automated watering systems, like Don Juan. And I guess, yeah, Don Juan was a big guy. I guess if you know the name, you'll know who we're talking about. He's a big influential figure on the old school underground forums, and he kind of pioneered the application of golf course style irrigations and large outdoor vegetable irrigation programs to indoor cultivation spaces. Like we use dosatrons, which are automated nutrient injectors for inline nutrient injection for drip irrigation systems. So we have like a pretty complicated system where there's water sensors sensing the water content of a pot. And when it gets to a certain dryness, the computer calls for a watering. The nutrients are automatically mixed and dosed to that specific zone. And those are like the things that are giving us the ability to attend to plants. So I'd say those early forum influences with regards to understanding drip irrigation were a massive influence in terms of our progression.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, I'd say Bubble Man was very big in terms of getting solventless hash into our minds and really understanding the importance of the 99% dry sift and isolating heads and understanding the science of that. So we're super thankful to him for not only this platform, but also for spreading that knowledge. I think that was super impactful.
Absolutely. Shout out to Marcus for everything. He's made a lot happen. I mean, the solventless space wouldn't be where it's at today without the work that the groundwork he laid. So hats off to him for sure.
Yeah, and probably John Conroy and Kirk. They were huge instrumental factors in terms of progressing the legal space. I think their movements in the medical sphere had a massive influence on the manifestation of recreational cultivation. So hats off to them as well, for sure.
Absolutely. I've reached out to Kirk to have him on. I'd love to and he's already agreed. So we're going to have him on later, probably early next year or later in the year to tell his story. So we're super excited about that. Brennan, Wayne, where's the best place for or your products? Your products are available countrywide through Mendo Medicinal, I believe, and then currently BC. Any other provinces planned, or currently just BC and then on the medical space?
Yeah, OCS is picking up the sour animal cartridges in the new year, so that'll be a big deal for sure. It's like a massive clientele, obviously, to be entering Ontario. The OCS is very strict in terms of what products they pick up and how often their reorders are, and everything like that are very strict. So you have to be willing and ready to meet their desires. And they are the largest cannabis purchasing entity in the world, and they represent a lot of influence in terms of what your products need to look like. And we're really not willing to sacrifice our quality, which means that our prices have to be a certain place, which is not very appealing to the OCS. So we're limited on terms of which relationships we can create with different provinces. We're quite focused on BC right now. We're super thankful to Mendo Medical to expand our access across the country. They have a great platform. We would definitely suggest people go there. But yeah, in terms of BC right now, we're in Sunrise, we're in THC, we're in Squamish, we're in Muse and Chiba, and there's more coming on every day. So if you're a customer and you want your store to carry it, you can go in there and tell them to reach out to us, and we'll get them set up.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Make sure you go to your store and ask for it. Where's the best place for people to get in touch with you?
Instagram, we always reply to our DMs pretty much instantaneously. We also have a website, brindlefarms.com, and it has a submission form where it goes directly to our emails, and we reply to every single one. We like to make ourselves available. You know, if you have any questions about our products, if you have any concerns, any interest, or you just want conversation, feel free to reach out. We have a passion for it and love speaking to people about it.
Awesome. Well, Brennan, Wayne, thank you so much for taking the time, man. I appreciate you coming on, and super excited to get your product. I'm going to be in BC next week. I'm definitely going to try and hit up a store and grab a couple things in there, and definitely yours as well. So thank you so much for taking the time, and appreciate having you on.
Thanks to you as well. We had a great time.
Absolutely. Cheers, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the show.